right, guys, so today we're going to talk about active listening in the classroom and what that looks like. In class, I would always, one of the things I like to use an example is music, and I would always play a song like the Macarena. Um, and I use that because a lot of students have never really, and myself included, paid attention to the lyrics of their song, and it's actually pretty adult themed. But we talk about how we hear those songs at kids' parties, school dances, weddings, because the dance is so popular. And so that's a good example of active listening versus just hearing something. There's tons of songs that can be examples of music we've heard, but we've never paid attention to the message of the song. So, what is the difference between hearing and listening? We touched on this a little bit with the analogy about hearing songs as opposed to listening to songs. Hearing refers to that sensing spoken message, right? So, that's the physical sensation our body does with the eardrums. And then the listening is when we start applying the context and the meaning to it. And then we apply that focused thinking. So, we're really paying attention to what it is that we're hearing so that we can respond or record. Active listening requires a listener to provide feedback. A lot of times in class, since it's not always like an engaged conversation, feedback might just be your note taking system, restating or paraphrasing. The goal is that repetition to confirm what you've heard. So you want to write out your notes, and then you can go back and you can review them later, and that shows what you've heard, what you've listened to. And then there's different degrees. I'm sure you're all experienced students, resulting in the quality communication. Um, so, we get distracted easily, even when we're sitting in class, even when we have our note taking system in front of us. Some professors are going to be more engaging and some may not be. And then, of course, the class that you're taking is going to be more interesting to you than some of the other classes. All of those affect how we active listening. And so it's up to you to find ways to help you focus. One of mine is when I'm note taking is I draw on the corners of my notes, and I am by no means an artist or good at drawing, but it keeps me from daydreaming when I'm not physically doing something in between pieces of the information that I need to record in my notes. I have a tendency to let my mind drift. So that's one way it helps me focus my mind. So what are things that you can do that helps keep that focus? 5 stages of the listening process is, of course, that receiving, that very first step where you first hear and understand the information. As you move into understanding, that's where you're applying the meaning and the context as you understand it. Then you begin to evaluate it. What does it mean? What does it mean to you? What does it mean in the context of the class? Then you respond, whether it's being asked a question by your professor or a classmate, and you respond, or you respond by writing down in your notes. Understand that can be your response. And then remembering. As we learned in our memory lesson 2 weeks ago, remembering requires a lot of repetition. This is a piece of that repetition, writing out your notes, taking what you listen, um, and that gives you something to review in your study practices. And this is just a clean way to see it. As we know, this is the way listening process works without any interferences, right? So this is without noises, without, stress things on our mind that we're thinking about, that maybe don't relate to class, but we just can't get it off our mind. Um, and then this is just like a very clear communication process to listening. Unfortunately, there are barriers that we have to learn to work with. If you can't hear, it can be as simple as moving to the front of the class. Um, it could be something not sitting, if you're sitting next to a friend, but they get real chatty during class, maybe you don't sit with them. Maybe you guys just chat before and after class. Things like that help you clean up that listening process so it has more of this cleaner look to it. Whatever you can do to control that environment so you can hear and actively listen in class. And then this is the 4 cycles of learning. And what I like about this is what's important is there's no end to it. Learning doesn't stop. So we can kind of begin with preparing, right? Getting our note taking system, coming to class, absorbing these new ideas as we're hearing them or reading them, recording our notes, which you can do while you're reading, and then, of course, again, while you're in the lecture, and then reviewing and applying. And then you're just gonna kind of pop around back to prepare, right? You get ready for a test, you're gonna start with preparing. Maybe you're not absorbing the new ideas and listening per se, but you're definitely going through those notes and you're definitely reviewing and applying. And as you prepare and you review, you might get some new ideas. Um, that's what studying does, right? You get certain ideas from it, and then you go back and then you get the more ideas. Um, and then we're going to move into principles of active listening. It's that focus, which is what I see a lot of students struggle with, whether you have things maybe at home or in another class or at work that are stressing you out. It's sometimes hard to leave that at the door, but you really need to practice leaving it at the door so that you can focus. Again, controlling where you're sitting in class and what's going on around you as best that you can. Be careful about not prejudging or assuming you already know the material. That's a great way to just sort of dismiss the speaker and turn them off. Um, Regardless of what you think of your professors, you should still be actively listening to catch any material that you don't know. Repeat what you just heard in class. That's going to start with your note taking system. Hopefully, you will have activities or things in class that help with that, but the very first start is going to be that note taking system. Again, ask questions if you need them. Listen for those verbal cues. I know we didn't get a lot of lectures with Mia in our class, but one that I do a lot is I say, this is definitely a test question. That's a really obvious verbal clue, but also there's nonverbal clues. If your teacher writes it out on the whiteboard, underlines it, repeats it, those are cues that it's something that you need to know. And then listen for requests. Listen for those questions your professors ask you. Anything that they tell you, like a resource they tell you you don't have to go look at, but you should go look at. Any of those kinds of things are just going to help you with that listening and with that engaging in the material.